CTU Secretary Melissa Ansell-Bridges has spent the last week at the International Trade Union Confederation in Melbourne, undertaking a stocktake of the global union movement to date and how it will be adapting to serve the world of work in the future. Melissa joins me now, and was there anything from that conference that serves as a heads up for employers here in New Zealand, do you think?
One of the interesting things that happened is we had a speech from Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, on Monday morning. And at that speech, he announced that Australia would be ratifying C190. So that's the ILO Convention on Violence and Harassment in the World at Work. And actually, New Zealand was, and a couple of our delegates to the ILO when this convention was passed 4 or 5 years ago. There were a couple of New Zealanders who were really central to the drafting of that convention. And so we're really keen to see it passed in New Zealand as well. We think it's a really important convention. And so we're keen to see the government take action on that. We're hoping that, seeing Australia do it across the ditch might serve as some motivation for the New Zealand government as well to get moving on ratifying C190, especially because of that close relationship that we've had with actually developing that convention as well. So hoping that they take a leaf out of Albanese's book and start moving on that one.
In what way would that change or strengthen or expand what we already have in the workplace in New Zealand?
It creates higher standards for employers in terms of actually actively preventing violence and harassment at work. So situations where that might be relative would be or relevant would be, it's not just, between co-workers. We might sort of think about, harassment being a sort of a workplace issue between co-workers, and it can be, but it's also actually for, workers in the care economy, say, who have, can do work which can actually, put them in harm's way sometimes, and the service economy as well, being on the receiving end. As we've actually heard quite a bit recently, people being stressed, going back into shops and being quite verbally abusive towards people who work in retail and hospitality, coming into Christmas as well, and people often get stressed, and we get, we hear a lot of stories from workers, from members about having quite unpleasant interactions with customers sometimes. So it's about employers taking a more active role to prevent that kind of violence and harassment for workers as well.
Why do you think Australia seems to be a bit ahead of New Zealand in this realm, or maybe many others? I'm not sure. What's your assessment of that?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I know that, in New Zealand, when we ratify those ILO conventions, we like to make sure that that actually, as soon as we ratify it, we are going to be living in accordance with it. And so that means often doing quite a bit of policy work and making sure that our legislation is in line with the requirements of the convention before we ratify it. And that can lead to, it's a longer policy process rather than immediately ratifying and then having it kind of as an aspirational document, which we sort of slowly work towards, which is the approach that some countries take. And there can be some value in that, I think, because it sort of then sets a requirement which can motivate those kinds of changes. But I think the important thing is that steps are being taken towards doing that work, and currently this doesn't seem to be as high on the agenda. And I think that's mostly around resourcing to do that policy work, and it's not the only convention either, that we would like to see, movement on. And so, it's really just resourcing and prioritizing that work more highly. I can't speak to what's happened in Australia, but obviously it's really exciting, and it's great that that's happened over there. We're just keen to see the same happen in New Zealand as well.
Right. There is a perception in New Zealand that in Australia the union movement is a bit stronger in the workplace and sort of a bit more powerful. Is that an accurate assessment?
I think that what we've seen recently, there's been a lot more talk about the union movement and about people, you know, being interested in unions and wanting to join unions, and they are sort of feeling a bit more relevant again, for a lot of people. And I think that some of that has actually come out of people's frustration with work recently. COVID, I think for a lot of people has really served as an opportunity to reflect on what's important for them, and to take stock of their work situations. For a lot of people, they've lost jobs throughout the pandemic. Or they've changed jobs, and that's just another sort of narrative that we've heard a lot recently. And with low unemployment, there are people sort of moving around as well, and maybe have a little bit more mobility. And I think that people are really sort of reassessing what's important at work and recognizing that in a lot of situations that they've been in, actually, it hasn't been a good situation in terms of being paid fairly and being respected at work, and having decent work. And they're keen to find a solution to that, and unions present a solution to that. So I think that that's where some of that interest has come from as well. There's obviously a lot happening in the industrial relations space in New Zealand as well, with fair pay agreements, and other work policy work that's been happening too. And so I suppose there's an element of unions sort of being more at the forefront of people's minds as well because of that. But yeah, I think a lot of it comes from a frustration and a feeling that actually work can be better, and it should be better, and how do we get there? And well, collectivizing is the only thing that's ever, in a sort of long-term fundamental way, actually changed anything at work. So people are looking at that as a path forward.
But do you get the sense in Australia that, are we moving more towards the Australian position in terms of our industrial relations, or is it just there's no comparison between the two?
Uh, so in some regards, I mean, fair pay agreements have some similarities to the modern awards system that exists in Australia. But talking to, our Australian counterparts, they actually really like some of the aspects of fair pay agreements which don't exist over there. And so in some ways, it feels like they're wanting to move more towards what we have in New Zealand now as
Yeah.
well. And some of the other announcements which Australia is really pleased with currently with the Albanese government, some of the improvements that he's made are things that we have had passed in the last couple of years in New Zealand as well. So they're things like 10 days paid domestic violence leave, for example, and increasing sick leave and so on. And currently there's a bill before Parliament over there which would include stronger provisions around equal pay. And so, there are some of those advancements, I suppose, which we've made in the last 5 years, which Australia is now looking to adopt, or already have adopted and are sort of moving towards as well. So in some regards, I think we're actually, playing a leadership role in that space as well, and have been over the last 5 years.